The Galactic Council sat in their grand chamber. Towering beings from every corner of the galaxy gathered to decide the fate of one small, stubborn planet. For too long, humanity had resisted. Their refusal to join the Galactic Order, their rapid technological progress, unmonitored, unpredictable, had become intolerable. The humans were dangerous, the Council agreed, a wild card that threatened the delicate balance of power. Some voices, quieter ones, spoke of diplomacy, of compromise, but they were drowned out by the overwhelming consensus: Earth had to be subdued. Or destroyed. In a solemn vote, the decision was made. Humanity's fate was sealed. The vast armada appeared in Earth's orbit without warning, blotting out the sun as their massive ships descended from the heavens. The message that followed was cold, efficient, as unfeeling as the beings who delivered it. The Earth below was nothing more than a tactical consideration now, a speck in the galaxy's grand design. They broadcast their ultimatum in every language, on every frequency. Surrender, or face annihilation. Humanity was deemed a threat to galactic peace, their defiance no longer tolerable. The response from Earth was anything but submissive. Panic rippled through the planet as the world's leaders scrambled to comprehend the magnitude of what loomed above them. But in the chaos, there was a core of steely resolve. The leaders of Earth, unified as one, stood their ground. Surrender was not an option. They had survived wars before, against themselves, against nature, against their own limitations, and this would be no different. Despite the technological gap, despite the overwhelming odds, Earth would not bow. The Council's response was immediate. From their ships, the first wave of bombardments rained down, targeting Earth's most vital cities, striking with surgical precision. Entire metropolises were leveled in seconds. Flames spread across the landscape as if the sky itself had caught fire. The destruction was beyond anything humanity had ever witnessed, swift, total, and utterly merciless. Every strike carried the weight of the Council's message: resist, and you will burn. Panic turned to terror as reports flooded in from every corner of the globe. Cities that had stood for centuries were now nothing but ash. The Earth trembled under the sheer force of the bombardments. In the span of hours, millions were dead, countless more wounded. Governments struggled to maintain order as fear spread like wildfire, igniting riots, chaos, and despair. And yet, in the face of this unimaginable destruction, humanity did not break. In bunkers deep beneath the earth, in military bases far from the devastation, the world's brightest minds began to plot their survival. They understood the magnitude of the force arrayed against them, but they also understood one truth that the Council did not. Humanity had never fought for dominance or control. They fought because survival was in their blood. The Council, with all its power, could not comprehend this primal need to endure. And so, even as the skies burned and the world crumbled, humanity's resolve hardened. The initial strikes were brutal, but they did not wipe out Earth's defenses entirely. Governments activated emergency protocols, and civilians were evacuated to secure locations. Military forces, though battered, began to regroup. Earth wasn't finished yet. The Council's warships hung in orbit, confident in their superiority, watching as their firepower reduced vast swathes of Earth to rubble. But they underestimated humanity's ability to fight back, to resist, even in the face of such overwhelming destruction. Humans had been here before, on the brink of ruin, and they had always found a way to survive. Now, they would do it again. Earth's first response was immediate, but hopelessly conventional. Military forces from every nation launched their most powerful weapons at the invading fleet. Nuclear missiles streaked across the skies, detonating with blinding flashes, their mushroom clouds rising ominously over the oceans. Drones swarmed into the air, hundreds of thousands of them, each carrying payloads designed to tear through armor. Anti-aircraft batteries fired ceaselessly, unleashing barrages of missiles, lasers, and railgun slugs into the heavens. But the Council's armada remained largely unscathed. Their shields, stronger than any Earth had ever encountered, absorbed or deflected the onslaught. The most destructive human weapons, those designed to end wars, were little more than nuisances to the invaders. The sheer size of the enemy force was beyond comprehension, Alien ships, kilometers long, hung in the sky like monoliths, slowly advancing as Earth's cities turned to rubble beneath their bombardments. The streets below were chaos. War had come to every major city on the planet, and Earth's militaries, once designed to protect against human threats, now faced an enemy they barely understood. As soldiers fought in desperate skirmishes against ground forces the Council deployed, entire urban centers turned into battlegrounds. But the humans, with their inferior weapons and outdated strategies, were overwhelmed. Their conventional attacks left only faint scars on the alien juggernauts. That's when the game changed. Across the globe, deep underground in hidden facilities, Earth's governments activated the secret technologies they had been developing in the shadow of suspicion, always preparing for an enemy they hoped would never come. Stealth drones, silent, invisible to even the most advanced sensors, took to the skies, slipping past the Council's defenses. AI-run defense systems came online, calculating faster than any human mind could comprehend, directing counterattacks with pinpoint precision. Quantum disruption fields flickered into existence, warping space-time itself to interfere with the Council's communication and navigation systems. The Council's fleet began to falter. Not by much, but enough for the cracks in their armor to show. Their ships, once untouchable, started to struggle against these unforeseen tactics. The shields that had shrugged off Earth's initial barrage flickered under the strain of thousands of autonomous drones striking in perfect coordination. Council commanders, arrogant and overconfident, had not anticipated this level of resistance. Earth wasn't supposed to have these kinds of technologies. They were supposed to be primitive, easy prey. As the Council's forces tried to adapt, Earth's leadership initiated their most daring move, Operation Phoenix. In bunkers deep beneath the surface, high-ranking officials and military leaders gathered, their faces grim but determined. Operation Phoenix was never meant to be used. It was a last resort, a contingency plan for the unthinkable. And now, that moment had arrived. Across the planet, signals were sent to hidden installations, activating technologies that had been kept secret even from most of Earth's population. Nanobot swarms, tiny machines, no larger than grains of sand, were released from hidden launch points, carried on the wind and through the water. These swarms, designed to infiltrate the most advanced enemy systems, began their silent, invisible assault. They slipped into the Council's ships unnoticed, bypassing shields and hulls, infiltrating the very heart of the enemy's technology. Once inside, they went to work, dismantling systems from the inside out, piece by piece. Entire ships suddenly went dark, their engines dead, their weapons offline. Confusion spread through the ranks of the Council's commanders. Ships that had been invincible were now falling from the sky, consumed by these invisible invaders. At the same time, AI-directed warfare escalated. Earth's autonomous weapons adapted to every tactic the Council deployed, learning from each engagement. Drones and unmanned fighters, faster and more agile than their human-piloted counterparts, danced through the skies, targeting weak points in the alien ships. Quantum missiles, warping in and out of space, hit Council vessels with devastating accuracy, sometimes vanishing one moment and reappearing right inside the enemy's shielded hulls. The Council's fleet began to suffer real losses. In key regions, humanity pushed back, winning small but significant victories. Over the Pacific Ocean, a massive Council dreadnought erupted in a ball of fire as nanobots tore through its internal systems, rendering it helpless before a barrage of quantum missiles. In Europe, a flotilla of Council ships, cut off from their reinforcements by Earth's disruption fields, fell prey to swarms of stealth drones that attacked relentlessly, ripping them apart. Shockwaves rippled through the Council's forces. The humans were supposed to be a minor threat, easily contained. But now, they were facing an enemy that fought with a cunning and resilience they hadn't anticipated. The initial plan of swift domination was collapsing. Council commanders found themselves on the defensive for the first time since the war began. Yet, for all their ingenuity, humanity was still outnumbered. Every victory was hard-won, and for every Council ship destroyed, dozens more remained. But those victories, however small, gave Earth something it desperately needed: hope. The Council's forces had not expected such fierce resistance, and for the first time in the conflict, the invaders were forced to acknowledge that this war would not end as swiftly as they had predicted. The tide hadn't turned yet, but for the first time, it wasn't moving solely in the Council's favor. The Council had never known fear. Their armada had conquered countless worlds, subdued entire star systems without breaking a sweat. But now, after sustaining unexpected losses, they were forced to do something they hadn't done in millennia: retreat. Their fleets pulled back, creating a temporary distance from Earth to regroup and reassess. Confusion spread through the ranks of the Council as they struggled to make sense of how a so-called primitive species could resist with such intensity. Inside the war rooms of the Council's most advanced warships, the mood was somber, bordering on disbelief. They had underestimated Earth, not just in terms of technology, but in terms of human tenacity. Debates flared among the Council leaders, many of whom had never questioned their superiority before. Some argued for a ceasefire, insisting that they hadn't expected this level of resistance, and that humanity might pose a greater threat if pushed further. Yet others, their pride wounded, argued that retreat would embolden humanity, and worse, send a message to other planets that the Council was vulnerable. The tipping point was fear that if left unchecked, humanity's rapid technological growth and now proven military cunning could threaten the very balance of power in the galaxy. The decision was made. Despite the damage, despite the growing doubts, the Council resolved to continue the war. Only this time, they would approach it with a grim determination to end the human threat once and for all. On Earth, the tone had shifted as well. The early stages of the war had seen humanity on the back foot, but now, the momentum had turned. Guerrilla tactics, bolstered by cutting-edge technologies, began to tear through the Council's ground forces. The human response wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about pushing back, reclaiming ground inch by inch. Across devastated cities, ragtag resistance fighters, citizens, soldiers, and scientists alike worked in concert with AI-driven systems. Drones patrolled the skies, their algorithms adapting to every Council tactic, launching surgical strikes on alien encampments before the invaders had a chance to regroup. In the chaos, Earth's nanobot swarms played a silent but deadly role. Invisible to the Council's sensors, these tiny machines continued to infiltrate their warships and ground equipment, dismantling critical systems from the inside. It wasn't just the Council's losses that mounted, it was their inability to explain why. Weapons malfunctioned, shields flickered, and ships that had been unbreakable found themselves crumbling. The human forces knew how to exploit these weaknesses with devastating precision, hitting fast and retreating before the Council could muster a response. Yet it wasn't just the physical assaults that began to turn the tide, it was the psychological warfare that humanity unleashed. Deep within the bowels of secret command centers, human hackers broke into the Council's communications network. They didn't just gather intelligence, they flooded the channels with disinformation, sowing confusion and chaos. Misinformation about human troop movements, fabricated images of overwhelming human forces, and recordings of Earth's leaders calling for relentless war efforts played on a loop. The Council's forces found themselves chasing shadows, preparing for attacks that never came, second-guessing their own strategies. But it wasn't only about disorienting the enemy. Humanity sent a clear message to the Council: Earth would not break. Videos of human resilience, of cities rebuilding even as the war raged on, spread through Council ranks. Images of fallen soldiers, civilians standing tall amid ruins, and fighters laughing in the face of death reached the eyes and ears of the enemy. The Council had never encountered a species that seemed to thrive on resistance, that grew stronger the harder it was pushed. For the first time, fear crept into their ranks, not fear of defeat, but fear of what humanity could become. Amid this turning tide, a story began to circulate among the human forces. A commander, one of Earth's finest, had undertaken a suicide mission to destroy a critical Council warship, the largest in the fleet. The mission, codenamed Hammerstrike, was simple: infiltrate the ship, plant a quantum destabilizer at its core, and detonate it from within. The problem was, there would be no way out. The destabilizer would warp space around the ship, shredding everything within a kilometer into oblivion. The commander volunteered without hesitation. Their team, a small, elite unit, slipped past the Council's outer defenses under the cover of a massive drone offensive. The plan worked flawlessly up until the final moment. The team successfully breached the ship's inner sanctum, placed the destabilizer, and prepared to set it off. But escape wasn't an option. The commander, knowing what was at stake, ordered their team to evacuate. They stayed behind, securing the final triggers, ensuring that the mission succeeded even as their fate was sealed. From the surface of Earth, millions watched as the Council's flagship exploded in a brilliant cascade of energy, fragments of the once mighty ship scattering across the sky. The victory was symbolic as much as it was strategic. Humanity had taken down the Invincible. But the cost was high. The commander's sacrifice became a rallying cry for Earth's forces, sparking a newfound sense of unity and determination. Across the globe, people who had once cowered in fear now rose to resist. Resistance cells grew in size and strength. Underground bunkers became centers of coordination, where civilians turned into soldiers, scientists became tacticians, and engineers crafted weapons from the ruins of their cities. The Council, who had once believed that sheer power would win the day, now faced an enemy with unmatched resolve. Every move they made, every new attack they launched, seemed only to strengthen humanity's resolve. Earth wasn't just defending itself anymore. It was winning. And now, the Council was starting to realize, they might not be able to stop it. The Council's fleet, though battered and bleeding from humanity's relentless counterattacks, still loomed as a grave threat. Earth's leaders, deep in the fortified command bunkers beneath the surface, faced an agonizing decision. Humanity had fought tooth and nail to survive, but the war had dragged on far longer than anyone expected. Entire cities had been razed, millions dead, and even now, the Council forces continued to rain destruction down from orbit. Earth's defenses were holding, but barely. The situation was dire. Victory, or total annihilation, seemed imminent. In the heart of the bunker, the discussion turned from strategy to survival at any cost. For months there had been whispers about a last-ditch option, a secret weapon that could end the war in one strike, a planetary-scale energy wave. It was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, a weapon developed in the shadows of Earth's darkest days. The wave would not just destroy ships or installations, it would wipe out life itself on a planetary scale, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. The room fell into a tense silence as the proposal was laid on the table. Some were horrified at the suggestion. "We cannot become the monsters we're fighting," argued one high-ranking official, her voice thick with emotion. "If we use this, we're no better than the Council. Worse, even. We would be the ones committing genocide." Others weren't so sure. "They didn't hesitate to annihilate our cities," countered a military leader, his face hardened by months of war. "They came to wipe us out. You think they'll stop if we show them mercy? This is the only way to make sure they never come back." The debate raged on, the stakes growing heavier with every word. It wasn't just about winning the war, it was about what kind of future would be left once the war was over. Could humanity live with the cost of unleashing a weapon that would obliterate billions of lives, wiping out entire civilizations in one stroke? But could they risk holding back, knowing that the Council might regroup and return stronger than before? In the end, the decision wasn't unanimous, but it was final. Fear of extinction outweighed moral hesitation. The leaders who opposed the weapon were forced to step aside, their objections silenced by the grim reality of Earth's situation. Humanity, pushed to the brink, was about to cross a line from which there would be no return. The countdown began. Across Earth's remaining strongholds, soldiers, civilians, and commanders alike waited with bated breath. This was not a moment of triumph, but one of cold necessity. The atmosphere was tense, somber. Even those who had supported the decision knew that something fundamental was about to change, within the galaxy, within themselves. At the command center, hands hovered over controls that would activate the weapon. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. And then, with a single keystroke, the weapon was unleashed. The energy wave, invisible but unstoppable, swept through the vastness of space. It was silent, but its impact was felt in an instant. Whole council planets, home to advanced species that had once ruled the stars, were vaporized in a flash of light. Cities, forests, oceans, everything was gone, reduced to nothingness. Entire civilizations that had stood for millennia were erased in mere moments. On the battlefield, council ships disintegrated as the wave passed through them, their mighty hulls collapsing into dust, leaving only debris floating in the void. Billions of lives extinguished in an instant. The scale of destruction was incomprehensible. Even those on Earth who had been bracing for it were left in stunned silence, staring at the monitors as the reports came in. The war, for all intents and purposes, was over. The Council, which had once commanded the largest military force in the galaxy, was shattered, their planets lifeless husks, their fleets reduced to wreckage drifting through space. For the first time since the war began, Earth stood alone. Victorious, but at a price so high that the word victory seemed hollow. The weight of what had been done settled heavily on the survivors. Earth's leaders, those who had made the call, and those who had tried to stop it, looked at each other, their expressions haunted. There was no celebration, no cheers of triumph. How could there be? The cost was too great, the consequences too severe. Humanity had survived, but in surviving, they had unleashed a weapon that would change the galaxy forever. The Council's remaining leaders, those few who had escaped the wave's path, were in shock. They had thought themselves untouchable, invincible. Now they faced the grim reality that they had underestimated humanity not just in war, but in the lengths they were willing to go to ensure their survival. No one had anticipated this level of retaliation. Entire species that had stood proudly at the head of the Galactic Council were now extinct. The message was clear: Earth would not be conquered, and any force that tried would be met with utter destruction. But as the dust settled, the question remained: what had humanity become in the process? In the aftermath, Earth was silent, but the galaxy was screaming. Alien species across the stars recoiled in fear and horror at what had happened. Humanity had crossed a line, one that could never be uncrossed. They had not just defended themselves, they had eradicated entire civilizations, changed the balance of power in the galaxy forever. Back on Earth, those who had activated the weapon wrestled with the consequences. They had survived, but at what cost? Was this the price of peace, or had they simply become the very monsters they had once fought against? The devastation was done, the galaxy forever changed, and humanity was left to face the moral fallout of their ultimate act of destruction. The Council's fleet, though battered and bleeding from humanity's relentless counterattacks, still loomed as a grave threat. Earth's leaders, deep in the fortified command bunkers beneath the surface, faced an agonizing decision. Humanity had fought tooth and nail to survive, but the war had dragged on far longer than anyone expected. Entire cities had been razed, millions dead, and even now, the Council forces continued to rain destruction down from orbit. Earth's defenses were holding, but barely. The situation was dire. Victory, or total annihilation, seemed imminent. In the heart of the bunker, the discussion turned from strategy to survival at any cost. For months there had been whispers about a last-ditch option, a secret weapon that could end the war in one strike, a planetary-scale energy wave. It was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, a weapon developed in the shadows of Earth's darkest days. The wave would not just destroy ships or installations, it would wipe out life itself on a planetary scale, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. The room fell into a tense silence as the proposal was laid on the table. Some were horrified at the suggestion. "We cannot become the monsters we're fighting," argued one high-ranking official, her voice thick with emotion. "If we use this, we're no better than the Council. Worse even. We would be the ones committing genocide." Others weren't so sure. "They didn't hesitate to annihilate our cities," countered a military leader, his face hardened by months of war. "They came to wipe us out. You think they'll stop if we show them mercy? This is the only way to make sure they never come back." The debate raged on, the stakes growing heavier with every word. It wasn't just about winning the war, it was about what kind of future would be left once the war was over. Could humanity live with the cost of unleashing a weapon that would obliterate billions of lives, wiping out entire civilizations in one stroke? But could they risk holding back, knowing that the Council might regroup and return stronger than before? In the end, the decision wasn't unanimous, but it was final. Fear of extinction outweighed moral hesitation. The leaders who opposed the weapon were forced to step aside, their objections silenced by the grim reality of Earth's situation. Humanity, pushed to the brink, was about to cross a line from which there would be no return. The countdown began. Across Earth's remaining strongholds, soldiers, civilians, and commanders alike waited with bated breath. This was not a moment of triumph, but one of cold necessity. The atmosphere was tense, somber. Even those who had supported the decision knew that something fundamental was about to change, within the galaxy, within themselves. At the command center, hands hovered over controls that would activate the weapon. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. And then, with a single keystroke, the weapon was unleashed. The energy wave, invisible but unstoppable, swept through the vastness of space. It was silent, but its impact was felt in an instant. Whole council planets, home to advanced species that had once ruled the stars, were vaporized in a flash of light. Cities, forests, oceans, everything was gone, reduced to nothingness. Entire civilizations that had stood for millennia were erased in mere moments. On the battlefield, Council ships disintegrated as the wave passed through them, their mighty hulls collapsing into dust, leaving only debris floating in the void. Billions of lives extinguished in an instant. The scale of destruction was incomprehensible. Even those on Earth who had been bracing for it were left in stunned silence, staring at the monitors as the reports came in. The war, for all intents and purposes, was over. The Council, which had once commanded the largest military force in the galaxy, was shattered, their planets lifeless husks, their fleets reduced to wreckage drifting through space. For the first time since the war began, Earth stood alone. Victorious, but at a price so high that the word victory seemed hollow. The weight of what had been done settled heavily on the survivors. Earth's leaders, those who had made the call, and those who had tried to stop it, looked at each other, their expressions haunted. There was no celebration, no cheers of triumph. How could there be? The cost was too great, the consequences too severe. Humanity had survived, but in surviving, they had unleashed a weapon that would change the galaxy forever. The Council's remaining leaders, those few who had escaped the wave's path, were in shock. They had thought themselves untouchable, invincible. Now they faced the grim reality that they had underestimated humanity not just in war, but in the lengths they were willing to go to ensure their survival. No one had anticipated this level of retaliation. Entire species that had stood proudly at the head of the Galactic Council were now extinct. The message was clear: Earth would not be conquered, and any force that tried would be met with utter destruction. But as the dust settled, the question remained: what had humanity become in the process? In the aftermath, Earth was silent, but the galaxy was screaming. Alien species across the stars recoiled in fear and horror at what had happened. Humanity had crossed a line, one that could never be uncrossed. They had not just defended themselves, they had eradicated entire civilizations, changed the balance of power in the galaxy forever. Back on Earth, those who had activated the weapon wrestled with the consequences. They had survived, but at what cost? Was this the price of peace, or had they simply become the very monsters they had once fought against? The devastation was done, the galaxy forever changed, and humanity was left to face the moral fallout of their ultimate act of destruction. The remnants of the Galactic Council were in disarray. What was once a powerful alliance of species that ruled the stars with an iron grip had been reduced to chaos. The destruction of their central worlds and the decimation of their fleets had broken them beyond repair. Leaders from species that had once stood tall as conquerors now scrambled for survival, begging for peace. Messages of surrender flooded Earth's communications channels, not out of hope, but out of sheer desperation. They no longer saw humanity as a rising force to be managed or an unpredictable anomaly in their order. They now viewed them as the ultimate power in the galaxy, one capable of annihilating anything in its path. The Council, that had for so long decided the fates of entire civilizations, no longer existed. In its place, a fractured galaxy of species feared and trembled, uncertain of what was to come. The Galactic Council had fallen, and in its place, Earth stood as the dominant force. But it didn't feel like a victory. On Earth, the war was over, but the celebrations were somber. For months, humanity had endured unimaginable loss. Entire cities were now rubble, reduced to memories by the Council's initial assault. Millions of lives had been lost, and those who remained were left to pick up the pieces of a shattered world. The Earth they had fought to defend was now a scarred planet, its populations decimated, its infrastructure in ruins. What was once a bright hope for peaceful exploration of the galaxy had been snuffed out. The dream of joining a galactic community had died alongside billions of lives, both human and alien. Amidst the wreckage, the remaining human leadership gathered. They had survived, and by any definition they had won. But there was no sense of triumph, no joy in what had been done. The cost had been too high. As they looked at the ruin around them, there was an undeniable truth that could not be escaped. Humanity had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. In the heart of this reflection stood a key military leader, one of the architects of Earth's defense, and the fateful decision to unleash the ultimate weapon. They had led humanity through the darkest days of the war, made the calls no one else would, and now bore the weight of what had been done. Alone in the silence after the war, they grappled with the consequences. The leader walked through what remained of their command center, its once bustling halls now eerily quiet. They had given everything for Earth's survival. They had sacrificed lives, made impossible choices, and in the end, ordered the strike that had eradicated entire worlds. It had been the only way, they told themselves. There was no other option. But as they looked at the destruction they had wrought, the victory felt hollow. Had humanity truly won? Or had they merely survived by becoming something else, something darker? The Galactic Council had come to annihilate Earth, and in response, humanity had shown a capacity for destruction that rivaled anything the Council had imagined. The leader stared at the reports of devastation, the endless list of the dead, and couldn't shake the feeling that something vital had been lost along the way. They had preserved humanity's future, but at what cost? What future awaited them in a galaxy now terrified of the species that had turned entire worlds to ash? The very thing they had fought to protect, the hope of a peaceful existence in the stars, had been obliterated the moment they unleashed their final weapon. Now they were feared not as explorers or diplomats, but as destroyers. The war was over, but the scars ran deep. Not just on the planet's surface, but in the hearts of those who had survived. Humanity had risen to become a galactic power, but it was a power forged in blood and fire, not diplomacy or peace. The leader couldn't help but question if this was what they had fought for, if this was the future they had envisioned when the war began. The galaxy would never forget the day humanity unleashed its full fury, and neither would they. As Earth's surviving population began to rebuild, the leader knew they would have to live with the weight of their choices. There was no going back to the way things were. They had crossed the ultimate line, and now they had to reckon with it. Would they be able to find a new path forward? Or would this act of destruction forever define them? The final thoughts of the leader lingered on the faces of those they had lost, the comrades who had fallen, the civilians who had perished, the billions of alien lives wiped out in an instant. Their victory had saved Earth, but the soul of humanity seemed lost amidst the ashes. They had ensured survival, but it felt as though they had lost something far more precious in the process, their sense of what it meant to be human. As they looked out across the ruined skyline of their world, the leader couldn't help but ask themselves the question that would haunt them for the rest of their days. In saving ourselves, have we damned what we could have been? The war was over. The Council was gone. Humanity had ascended to the top of the galactic order, but in doing so, had forever altered its place in the stars. There would be no forgetting what had been done, no undoing the destruction. Now, as the galaxy trembled in the wake of Earth's survival, the future was uncertain. Humanity had won, But the price of that victory would echo across the cosmos for generations to come. The leader turned away, leaving the question of humanity's future unanswered, the cost of victory etched deep into their soul.